Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're tackling a really fundamental topic in environmental studies, the ecosystem. We're going to break down what it is, what it's made of, and how it all clicks together. And don't worry, I'll keep it super simple and clear for you. So, to get our minds warmed up, I've got a little riddle for you. What on earth could a huge forest, a little pond, and even a single drop of water have in common? Sounds a bit weird, right? But trust me, there's a really cool connection there. Stick around, and by the end of this, the answer will be crystal clear.
All right, here's our plan for today. We'll start with the basics of what an ecosystem even is. Then we'll get into its building blocks, how it works, and how energy and materials move through it. We'll even touch on how we model these things. And of course, we'll wrap up with a quick summary. So let's jump right in.
Okay, first things first, let's get a really solid definition down. What exactly is an ecosystem? So at its heart, an ecosystem is just a community of living things, we call those biotic, interacting with all the non-living stuff around them. That's the abiotic environment. Think about it. The biotic parts are the plants, animals, bacteria, everything that's alive. The abiotic parts, that's the sunlight, the water, the soil, the air. The big idea, which came from a scientist named Arthur Tansley way back in 1935, is that all these parts, living and non-living, are totally interconnected. They work together as one big system. And here's what's so amazing about this concept. Ecosystems come in all sizes. I mean, you can have a massive one, like an entire ocean or a huge forest. But you can also have an ecosystem that's as tiny as a single drop of water from a pond. Seriously. Inside that one drop, you've got microscopic creatures living, interacting with the water and nutrients. It's a whole world in there. The fundamental rules are exactly the same, whether it's gigantic or microscopic. So, how do we organize all these different ecosystems? Well, we can sort them into a few categories. The biggest split is between natural ecosystems, the ones that exist on their own, and man-made or artificial ones, like a cornfield or a fish tank. Then, if we look at the natural ones, we can split them into terrestrial, which just means land-based, and aquatic, which means water-based. And we can get even more specific, right? Like aquatic can be freshwater, such as a river, or marine, like the big open ocean. Okay, so we know what an ecosystem is. Now let's take it apart and look at the pieces. What are the essential building blocks of any ecosystem? You'll find that every single ecosystem, no matter where it is made of two main kinds of parts. First, you've got the abiotic components. Remember, that's all the non-living stuff. Sunlight, temperature, water, the minerals in the soil, you name it. And then you have the biotic components. That's just the scientific word for all the living organisms. All the plants, animals, fungi, and bacteria that call that place home. Okay, let's look a little closer at the living, the biotic side of things. We can basically divide all living things into two groups based on how they eat. First up, we have the autotrophs, which you can just think of as the producers. These are the self-feeders, like green plants, that make their own food using sunlight. They're the powerhouses of the ecosystem. Everybody else, they're heterotrophs, or consumers. They can't make their own food, so they've got to eat other organisms to get energy. This group includes everything from herbivores that eat plants, to carnivores that eat other animals, and even the decomposers, like fungi, that break down dead stuff. All right, so we have all the pieces of the puzzle, the living stuff and the non-living stuff. But how does it all fit together? What's the job of an ecosystem? What does it actually do? Fundamentally, every ecosystem is busy doing two main things. Job number one is managing the flow of energy. It all starts with the producers, the plants, capturing energy from the sun. Then that energy gets passed along when an animal eats the plant, and another animal eats that animal. Job number two is recycling materials. When plants and animals die, decomposers get to work, breaking them down and returning all those valuable nutrients back to the soil. It's basically nature's perfect zero-waste recycling system. Now, we often learn about this energy flow as a food chain, right? It's a simple, straight line. The grass gets eaten by a grasshopper, the grasshopper gets eaten by a frog, and so on. But real life is way messier than that. In reality, it's more like a food web. That frog doesn't just eat grasshoppers, and it's not just eaten by one thing. It's a whole complex network of interconnected chains. This complex web is actually super important because it makes the whole ecosystem much more stable and resilient. Just take a look at this grassland food web here. You can see the mouse isn't just food for the snake. A fox might eat it, a hawk might eat it. So what happens if the mouse population crashes? Well, it's not just the snake that goes hungry, it affects the fox and the hawk too. This is a perfect illustration of why having lots of different species, biodiversity, is so critical.
It keeps the whole system from falling apart if one piece has a bad year. Okay, let's zoom in a bit more on those two big jobs, the flow of energy and the cycling of materials. This is really the engine that makes the whole ecosystem run.
Now here is a super important point, so listen close. Materials, like water and carbon, get recycled. They go around and around in a loop. But energy doesn't. Energy flows. It moves in one direction. It comes into the system, gets passed from one organism to the next, and with each step, a lot of it is lost as heat. It's a one-way street. And for pretty much every ecosystem on our planet, where does that energy journey begin? You guessed it, the sun.
The water cycle is probably the best example of this material recycling. You know how it works. Water evaporates up into the sky, forms clouds, and then falls back down as rain. It flows into rivers, gets used by plants and animals, and then evaporates again. It's a constant, never-ending loop, moving this essential material through both the biotic and abiotic parts of our world. Okay, so we've got these core principles down. But how do scientists actually use this information? How can they possibly study something so complex and try to predict what might happen to it in the future? Well, one of their most powerful tools is something called ecological modeling. It sounds complicated, but the basic idea is that scientists use math and computers to create a kind of virtual ecosystem. It's like building a simulation. These models are incredibly useful. They let scientists test what-if scenarios, like what if a pollutant enters this lake? Or what if the temperature rises? It helps them understand how these systems work and what might happen to them down the road. So, to build one of these models, you basically need 5 ingredients. Let's stick with our pond example. First, you need the inputs, things coming from the outside, like sunlight. Second, you need state variables, the things you're keeping track of, like how many fish are in the pond. Third, you need the process pathways, how things move around, like energy flowing from plants to fish. Fourth, you figure out the interaction, how all these things affect each other. And finally, you add in feedback, which is how the system responds and changes itself. Put it all together, and you have a digital twin of your pond that you can study. Woo, okay. We have covered a ton of information. So let's take a minute and do a quick summary of the key takeaways to make sure it all sticks. So here's what you really need to remember. An ecosystem is all about the interaction between living, biotic, and non-living, abiotic things. Its structure is its parts, the abiotic stuff like sun and water, and the biotic stuff like producers and consumers. Its function is what it does, the one-way flow of energy and the recycling of materials. Remember that food webs are way more realistic and stable than simple food chains. And finally, ecological models are the cool computer tools we use to understand and predict what's going to happen in these incredibly complex systems.
And that brings us all the way back to that question I asked at the beginning. If a single drop of water is an ecosystem, what would its biotic and abiotic components be? Think about it. You now have all the tools to answer that. It's just an amazing thought, isn't it? That our world is so incredibly complex, even in a space that small. For more clear explanations and daily IGNU videos, subscribe to IGNU Mind Decoded.